Okay, Deann, I think you are good to go.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Strong Readers call. Today we are reviewing Strong Readers Act 2026, all of the requirements of Strong Readers, including all of the new changes for this year, as well as we will be discussing some of the upcoming changes that may not go into effect for another year or so. But we're going to go ahead and look at all of that. I'm going to start with just this is my contact information. If you have any strong readers questions, you can reach me at that phone number. That is my direct line. And as well as this is a literacy inbox where someone in our literacy office will answer your questions. I didn't introduce myself, but most of you already know me. My name is Deann Jones, and I'm the project director for the Strong Readers Act here in the state of Oklahoma. In this session, we will talk about the requirements for kindergarten through third grade under the Strong Readers Act. And we're going to talk about the required documentation and reporting, as well as any new requirements for this year and any changes we're seeing to any of that due to our new legislation. The first change that you would see if you read through the whole Strong Readers Act is a little bit of change of language in the purpose. What's new is that we included some language specifically about MTSS. And then also they had to change a little bit of the language about grade level promotion because we're bringing back some pieces of retention and promotion requirements. So this is a paraphrase from the purpose from the Strong Readers Act. One thing that is new this year is some definitions of terms. We had some terms that we wanted to make sure that we were all speaking about the same thing when we use these terms. So you will see we have a few different terms that are now defined in statute so that we can make sure that we are all talking about the same thing. One of the things you'll notice here is literacy coach and also reading specialist and then reading interventionist. We wanted to make sure that we really defined in statute so that everyone is talking about the same thing. Some of these roles have specific requirements and qualifications that you have to have for these roles, as well as we want to make sure that we defined what the role of that person is. For example, the reading specialist does require a graduate level degree and passing a certification to be a certified reading specialist. So we want to make sure that we made that clear in statute so that when we're talking about requirements, everyone is talking about the same thing. So those are in statute now. When we're moving on through talking about requirements, the first one we're going to talk about is assessment. There are 3 different types of assessments that are required with the Strong Readers Act, and we're going to go through each one of those and talk about what's required and the purpose of them as well. Before we get into the assessment, let's talk about exemptions. So under the Strong Readers Act, it is provided that there are certain students that can qualify for an exemption. And if you are exempting these students, they are exempt from the screening requirement and all requirements of the Strong Readers Act, including being put on a slip. This is nothing new. All of these exemptions are just like they were last year. So we have the exemption for students who participate in the OAP and being taught with alternate methods. They have to have an IEP, and it has to state in their IEP that they participate on the OAP. And then we have for students who use Braille and sign language. For these 3, the OAP, the sign language, and the Braille, there is a form you have to fill out, and it has to stay in that student's permanent file. If you have one filled out for this student, that exemption will be good for them all the way through 3rd grade. The last exemption is for our EL students, the students who are English language learners that have identified using a state approved assessment tool, and they've had less than 1 year of instruction. These students also have to have the form filled out, it has to be signed by everyone that's required and be on file. But the difference for this one is that it's only a 1 year exemption. So if you fill this out for a student in 1st grade, that only exempts them for 1 year because it says the student has had less than 1 year of instruction. So their exemption would only be good for 1 year, where the other ones above are good. Once you fill it out, it's good for the whole time. With all of these exemptions, you would count these students as exempt in your exempt numbers every year, even though you're not filling out the form every year for these students. For the first three categories, you're still going to count them every year in your number of students exempted from the requirements of the Strong Readers Act. So the first type of assessment that is required is universal screening. The purpose of universal screening is to identify which students are at risk of reading difficulties. These are where we're seeing who needs some help so that we can make sure that we're giving them the help they need. It is required that you give a universal screener, an approved universal screener for all students in kindergarten through third grade 3 times a year, which is the beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of year. Beginning year assessments are permitted to be during August and September. Middle of the year ones have to be in December or January, and end of the year has to be in April or May. Students who score below the 40th percentile rank on these universal screenings have to be placed on a SLIP, which is our Student Literacy Intervention Plan, and that has to be in place within 30 days of the close of the assessment window. If you were doing this last year, you'll notice that is a little bit different in our wording. And previously it said 30 days from the date the student took the assessment. Now we've extended that to say 30 days from the close of the assessment window. We just feel like that is going to make this a little bit easier on our district so that you can have one deadline for every student, 30 days from the close of the assessment window. Still fulfills the purpose of the statute, but gives a little bit more flexibility for our districts when meeting these timelines. The dyslexia screener is also required for students who score below the 40th percentile rank on your universal screening. You have an in statute, you have an additional 30 days to give this component. Now we do realize that some of our screeners have this embedded into the universal screening. And so you would not need that additional 30 days. For example, Amira, once a student takes the universal screening, it is simultaneously screening them for the characteristics of dyslexia at the same time, and you would not need an additional 30 days. But some of our other screeners have additional measures that when students score below the 40th on the universal screener, you go back and give additional measures, such as STAR. You would go back and give the CBMs, and you would have an additional 30 days to get that accomplished. And then you would have an additional 15 days from that date to notify the parents of the results of the screening for characteristics of dyslexia. But if you're doing one where you're doing it all at the same time, you can get that all done, notify the parents all at one with one notification, and you wouldn't need those extra days. Amira is our state provided screener that we have a contract with at state level, and that is available for all of our districts to use for their students. The screener is available for K through 8th grade at no cost to districts, and the tutor for K through 5th grade. This will be provided this next year as well. However, if your district chooses not to use Amira, you can choose one of our other approved screeners. This is the list of the screeners. You will notice this is a little bit different list than we had last year. This list gets reviewed and approved on a cycle, and it was just time for the cycle to come up. And so you will notice there are a couple missing that were there before. Acadience and Fastbridge are no longer on the approved list. We also had some previously that were approved for certain grade levels or only for universal screening, and then you had to have additional measures for characteristics of dyslexia. This time we did not allow any screeners that weren't able to be used K through 3rd grade to apply. So if you were using one that was only for a certain, like we had one that was only for kindergarten, that's no longer allowed. We only allowed ones to apply that could be used for all the grades, K through 3rd grade. And that also had some measure that you could screen for the characteristics of dyslexia. So this is what our new list looks like. So your school can either choose to take Amira, which is provided with no cost to districts, or your district can pay for one of these other approved ones, and you can use your Strong Readers funds to pay for it as well. Starting in the 27-28 school year, we will move to one single statewide screener that every elementary school across the state will be using. So this is what the process for selection is going to look like. OEQA is conducting an RFP for this right now, and they are going to narrow it down to 3. So once they run their RFP and narrow it down to 3 screeners, then OSDE will choose from those 3 and we will announce the statewide screener. We are hoping our projected timeline for this is that we are hoping to announce early in 2027 what the statewide screener will be for the 27-28 school year so that we can spend that spring semester with the vendor offering professional development for all of our districts and teachers, making sure that everyone has had all the training that they need to make sure that we are being effective using our new statewide screener. You'll notice on this screen that there is something in green at the top. So as we're going through these slides, if you see something in green text, that means that it is new this year due to the passing of Senate Bill 1778. So this was about our notice of proficiency that we had for the previous 2 years, where if a student scored at the 60th percentile rank on the screener during the year, that you had to send a notice of proficiency to the families that their student had met this score, and they would be they're on track for proficiency and would be unlikely to need any intervention. This new legislation removed this from statute. So this requirement is going away. We will no longer be doing notice of proficiency. So once again, for 26, 27, this upcoming year, starting this next month, with the 26-27 school year, you will no longer be sending notices of proficiency. We do feel like this is a good move. I'm glad to see this notice go. And the reason that we are glad to see this go is that screeners are really meant to identify risk. They are not meant to measure proficiency. So using our screeners to send notices of proficiency was not really best practice and best use of our screeners. So we're glad to see this requirement go, and just you can mark that off of your plate. You will no longer be sending notices of proficiency. So we've done the universal screening. We know what students need some extra help. Now the next step, and also the next required assessment that you're to do, is a diagnostic assessment. The purpose of a diagnostic assessment is to identify our students' needs. What we've already said, we've already determined what students need some extra help. Now what kind of help is it that they need? What do we need to be providing interventions on? So these are recommended for your students who are already determined to be at risk. If they scored below that 40th percentile rank, you need to give them a diagnostic assessment. We at the State Department level, we do not have a list of approved diagnostic assessments. This is a local choice at your district. Your district can choose what diagnostic assessment best fits the needs of your students and staff and make that call at the local level. Lots of times, whatever you're using for your intervention materials, your intervention programs, they'll come with a diagnostic assessment. It might be called a placement test, and that would be perfectly appropriate for you to use to fulfill this. And also it's great for you to use to just know where you need to be starting with that student. What interventions do we need to begin with? Maybe what lesson do we start with? This student needs this skill. This is where we're going to start with. So this is the second type of assessment. We know who needs help. Now we know what kind of help they need. So now we're going to start our intervention, start intervening on our students' behalf, start trying to close those skill gaps. Once you're into interventions and you've been providing interventions for these students, then the next type of assessment that it's really important that you do and is required under the Strong Readers Act is progress monitoring. The purpose of your progress monitoring is to determine if your interventions are being helpful and to monitor your students' progress toward their goals, toward closing those skill gaps. We have a recommended frequency for students that are receiving Tier 2 interventions, recommend that they would be progress monitored at least monthly. And for students receiving those Tier 3 supports, that they would be progress monitored each week, at least weekly. Now, I will say that that is not a requirement as of right now. We do not have set administrative rules or requirement in statute as to how often you would be doing progress monitoring. We just have recommendations. It is required that you are progress monitoring, but we do not have set requirements as to how often. You will notice at the bottom right there in green text, one new requirement. And so we do have a new requirement for students that are on a slip that you're providing these interventions for. They did put into statute a new requirement that you would be giving an update in writing to the parents of the students that are on a slip, that they would be getting an update every 30 days as to their progress and how their interventions are going. We have just developed a sample form for that. It is posted. You can find it on our Strong Readers website. Right underneath the slip, you will see a listing that says slip 30-day update. And that is our sample form for what you can use this next year to fulfill this requirement. I will say it is sample. It is not required that you use ours. So right underneath where we have this sample posted, you will see that there is a little disclaimer that says that if your district wishes to develop your own slip update form, you can, and it tells you exactly what you have to have included in it if you choose to develop your own. But if your district doesn't want to choose to develop your own, you are welcome to use ours. That's what we provided it for. And you can find that once again on our Strong Readers website. Also, the slip has been updated for this upcoming year, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And here we go. Here it is right here. This is the slip. So the purpose of the slip is for us to document all of the interventions that we're providing for our students who have been identified as having reading difficulties, and make sure that we're communicating that very clearly within your team, within your school, as well as with the families of our students that are on the student literacy intervention plan. We want to identify what needs they have, document what we're doing for them, monitor their progress, and communicate that with their families. We have updated the slip when the statute changed this spring. They actually just removed from statute some of the things that it did say earlier. Earlier, there were some specific things that had to be included in the slip. And when they updated the statute, they removed some of that. And so that gave us some leeway to kind of adapt and update our slip. It had gotten really lengthy. And we had schools saying that it was a lot to manage. It had gotten to like 4 pages long. And so we went through what was required and took away some of the things that were on there that were no longer required, and we got the slip down to 2 pages. So that new version of the slip is posted on our website right now. You can go on and find the new slip for fourth and beyond, as well as our 30-day update. All of those are posted and there. Some of the things that did change on the slip is some of the required signatures. So previously, reading specialist said if available. And you'll notice now that that is in green text where it says new. And that is because they made that a required line. But instead of just saying reading specialist, because we know not everyone has a certified reading specialist in their building, it says reading specialist, interventionist, or teacher with a micro credential. So this could be one of the micro credentials from our new academies that were started this summer in cooperation with OEQA, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. As well as it could be if you have a teacher with a micro credential in letters training or Lit Cop or Ames Pathway. Those would qualify. Teachers with those credentials in literacy would qualify to sign that line on the slip as well. Another thing is administrator is a required signature now. It used to be a required signature, and then that had been taken off for a few years, and now that is back on as a required signature. This part hasn't changed. You have 30 days to get it completed. Once now it is from the screening window closes, you have 30 days to get that signed. And then you'll see down at the bottom another little green text new, and that's the 30-day update that I was talking about. So you will have to give updates to these families every 30 days as to how their student is doing with their interventions and how, if they're ready to move on to a new skill, or how that's going. So we've talked about all the assessments. Let's talk about what we're doing after we've identified who needs help and what kind of help they need. What are we doing for them? This is a graphic from MTSS and just talking about that framework. Strong Readers does follow the MTSS framework for instruction. It always has. The only thing that is new is that that is explicitly stated in statute now. So as you noticed earlier in the Strong Readers purpose change, where there are now some MTSS language built into that, we've got that a few places in statute, just emphasizing that we do follow that model of providing support for our students. What does that look like in our literacy block? And this is what it looks like. You have tier one, and that's that 90 minutes of literacy instruction every day. Our students should be getting 90 minutes of instruction in literacy every day. It doesn't have to be uninterrupted. It just means they have to get it. So you could do 45 minutes, go to PE, come back and do the other 45 minutes. We want it in as large chunks as possible, but if it has to be interrupted and then you come back, as long as they're still getting 90 minutes total, that is fulfilling the requirement. Tier two is our targeted intervention, and tier three is our most intense intervention. So let's talk about that tier one. I just talked about that core instruction. Tier one students who are scoring at the 40th percentile or above do not require a SLIP plan. They are just getting that 90 minutes of instruction with their classroom teacher every day, and that is fulfilling what those students need and meeting their needs. We do have tier one with enhanced support. So this was previously called tier one plus differentiation. And it caused some confusion where people thought that was a fourth tier, and it is not really the case. We still have tier one, tier two, and tier three. So we've tried to change the name. This in practice didn't change anything what you're doing with these students between the 26th and the 39th. We just tried to change the name to tier one with enhanced support to really show that our students between the 26th and the 39th, they're still really considered in tier one, and they can still be served in that tier one 90-minute block. But if they're scoring between the 26th and 39th percentile, you are required to put that student on a SLIP, student literacy intervention plan, and provide some enhanced support for that student in the areas where they're weak. So this, unlike tier two and tier three, this can be within the 90-minute block. This is just in that 90-minute block, but the teacher, general education teacher, is pulling these students that are scoring between that 26th and 39th back to her table, giving them a little enhanced support on the skills where they are showing some weakness. So once again, I just want to clarify because we had some questions last week after this. In tier one, if those students are scoring at the 40th or above, no SLIP is needed. But students still in tier one, but they're between the 26th and the 39th, they do require a SLIP. You're providing them some intervention in that 90-minute block, and you're going to document those interventions, have their parents sign it, give them that 30-day update. Now let's move to tier two. So this is our students who are scoring between the 11th and the 25th percentile. These students require a SLIP, and you're going to be giving them interventions. We have recommended that this be small group size, maybe 6 to 8 students, meeting 3 to 5 days a week, about at least 15 minutes in addition to that tier one time. So these students are getting the 90 minutes, but then they're getting an additional at least 15 minutes. It could be your general education teacher, but it's really better if you have the chance to have someone, an interventionist, reading specialist, someone that's pulling them out or pushing into the regular classroom and giving this targeted instruction for these students on the skills that they need help. We don't currently have requirements on how often and how the frequency and duration of these, but that may be coming a little bit later. We are going to be developing over the next year some more explicit requirements for these, and I think I'll have a slide in a few minutes that talks a little bit about that a little bit more. Moving on to tier three, and this is for our students who really need that most intensive intervention support. This is our readers who are scoring between the 1st and 10th percentile. It also could be your students who were in tier two, but you weren't seeing that progress that you wanted. They were already receiving some intervention for 20 weeks, and you weren't seeing that increased, and you weren't closing those gaps like you wanted to, you could bump them to tier 3. But students in this receiving this level of support, they need to be on a slip and real small group size, maybe 1 to 3 students meeting daily, at least 30 minutes in addition to tier 1. Really has to be someone pulling them out to be able to give them this intense of interventions. Intervention rules. So we do have a few new rules. These top 3 are in statute new. This whole slide is new. And these first few are in effect for this upcoming school year. For the 26-27 school year, interventions for literacy cannot occur during math time. You can't be pulling kids from their math instruction time to give them their reading instruction, their reading intervention time. Your interventions cannot be solely provided by digital technology. Now, it doesn't say you can't use digital technology, but we want it to consist primarily of direct instruction with a reading specialist or a teacher that has been trained in the science of reading. So that's those other things we were talking about: an interventionist, someone with a micro credential, some type of extra training in literacy. And now in statute, they said this with Senate Bill 1778, that OSDE would be promulgating rules for interventions. So that's what I was talking about a while ago. We will be working on this school year in 26-27. We will be working on promulgating the rules for interventions, and this could include rules such as the duration, the frequency, who's allowed to provide the intervention. So we will be working on those this school year, but they won't go into effect until the 27-28 school year. So for this upcoming year that you're getting ready for 26-27, the things I talked about are still recommended, not required as far as to how often and how many minutes. And but these first 3 things on these pages, that it can't be during math and it has to be primarily in direct instruction, not digitally based, those are in effect for 26-27. For all of this that we're talking, all of our levels of instruction, we do have a ban on 3Qing in the state of Oklahoma. This is not new. It was put into effect for 25-26. So this is going into, your second school year with this, is that you across the state, we are banned from using any method of teaching reading using syntax, meaning, structure, syntax, and visual clues. You might hear this called MSV, balanced literacy, whole language, but any system of teaching reading that uses the 3Qing system is banned in the state of Oklahoma. So what that means for you now, since we've already had it into effect last school year, going into another school year, is just making sure that you know what 3Qing is and that you know what practices to avoid, as well as reviewing any materials that you have. If you have materials that you've had for a few years, just reviewing them and make sure that they're not using these practices that we know are not best practices and should no longer be used. So if you see some of that in your materials, making sure that you're still covering the content that they want you to cover, but use a different method, a different strategy for presenting that material. Summer school. There are some changes going to be rules that put into place for summer school. It will take effect next summer for summer 2027. And one of the rules that it said is that summer school would be a minimum of 70 hours. We will be maybe developing some other administrative rules to, if you're using strong readers funds to pay for summer school. We had some previously that detailed how many weeks it had to be and hours and days. Those will be removed and changed because now we will follow what it says in statute, which is now that it says it will be 70 hours. But you can look that, we'll have this school year to get that into effect. And before we get to the summer 2027, we'll have some more guidance out on specific rules for our summer school for next year. We do offer evidence-based intervention materials guidance list on our website. It is not, I do want to make sure that I'm making it known that it is not an approval list. We do not have an approval list. Your districts and sites are free to purchase any evidence-based evidence. You can purchase any intervention materials and intervention programs that you think best fits the needs of your students and teachers. but we're providing this as a guidance. We know there's so many of them to look through and it takes a lot of time. And so we have done that. We've had a list, we've had a team of literacy experts to review vendor submitted materials. If the vendor applied for this list, they had to send in certain things and we reviewed them. And if they met our criteria, then they were placed on this list. So if you're looking for something new and we have it posted on there as to what things, if it's a phonics, if it addresses phonics, is it a vocabulary program? Does it address all the components of literacy? So if you're looking for something specific, you can go look at that Airtable on our website, and that would be a great place for you to start. At least maybe to a place to look at, go from there, narrow them down from there, and we just hope that that's gives you a jumping off place and somewhere you can look, something that you know it has been approved, has been looked at and deemed to be using best practices. So let's talk about reporting requirements. Um, as I'm getting into reporting requirements, I just want to talk about reporting. I know it's not fun. It's not fun keeping up with all the numbers. It's not fun filling out the reports, keeping up with the deadlines, but it is important. This is really how we get a feel for what's going on across the state. And so that we can get the best picture of really how it's going in the schools, how it's going with our students. Are we progressing? Where's our areas of deficits? What do we need to work on better? And also financially, this is how we're able to give an account for the money that's being spent on strong readers. We'll get into funding in just a minute, but our legislators really appropriated a substantial amount of money to the Strong Readers Act this year. And this is how we're tracking what's being done in our state. And this is how we're being held accountable for how those dollars are being spent and if it's really making a difference for young students across our state. So really important that you're getting your numbers to us on time and that they're accurate. So we have the best picture to show how the state of literacy in Oklahoma right now and how our tax dollars that are being spent, a substantial amount of money being spent on this, and if it's being effective. So as we're getting into that, the first report that you're filling out every year is your reading plan. There's no change on this really substantially. It's just our reading plan, same due dates. Not a lot of change here. You'll see here it is. So the only thing you'll see on green on this, it's the same, opens the same date, due the same date. The only thing is how you're going to be submitting it. We're going to have an updated application. It's still in Strong Readers Act, and it is still the Strong Readers Plan and Survey, but it's going to look a little different. Our application that we had for submitting this was just, it was pretty old and it wasn't very user friendly and it sometimes had glitches. And so OMES has been working in conjunction with our office for the last year and that we've made a lot of changes to it. And I hope that it's going to be more user friendly. I hope that it's going to make it easier for you to get your information in, and I hope it's going to be easier for us to get the data that we need. So looking forward to that this year and hoping that it's going to be a better service and a better user experience. The other report that you do every year is the Strong Readers Survey. You'll notice a few green things on here. The BOY report, same due dates, open August 15th, closing October 1st. Very important. That is a very important deadline, is that we get your numbers about October 1st. That is how we get the numbers to know how many students are getting tiered support, which determines your funding for strong readers. You'll notice in green it says new questions. There are a few new questions that are going to be on the beginning of the year report this year. Specifically, we're going to have to know how many students are in each tier. Because previously we were only finding out how many students were received on a slip and receiving interventions. And it didn't matter if they were receiving tier 1 plus interventions or tier 2, tier 3. But now we're specifically going to have to know how many students are receiving each tiered level of support because there's some funding changes that's going to matter on. So that's some new questions there. The EOI report, no real changes as of yet. And then you'll see at the very bottom the summer school report report says in green text, removed from survey. So if any of you have been looking, because that's currently should be open right now, it should have opened June 1st and closed July 30th. However, we completely removed that report from the Strong Reader survey. So if you're in there looking for that, you will not find it right now. However, we do still need your information. So instead, what we did is we took that off as its own report, but we just added those questions to the BOI. So if you've got you did summer school and you've got that information saved somewhere, just hang on to it. And when this BOI report opens, those questions will be at the end of the BOI. We did this in hopes that that's just going to streamline this reporting for districts. It's still going to give us the information that we need, and it's still going to allow that to be reported back to us. But hopefully, that's just making that a little easier on our districts and streamlining that. One less due date for you to remember. One less time for you to have to log in and fill it out. And instead, you'll just be putting that information in on the BOI. And I hope that's going to be helpful to you. The website requirement, we still do have that website requirement that you are posting the information from the previous school year onto your website in the OSD provided format by September 1st. So by this September 1st of 2026, you will be entering the information from last school year, 25-26. You're gathering all that information. You're putting it in the OSD provided format you can download on our website, and you're posting it by September 1st. There were no changes to that for this year. So if you're the one who did it at your school last year, it's going to look just like it did last year. We had no changes for this year. Now, there will be some additional requirements that will be added next year, because when we start bringing back the retention piece, there will be some questions regarding that. But for what you're doing for this September 2026, it looks just like it did last year. This is what it looked like. It's what it's going to look like again this year. Everything's going to be exactly the same. If you remember from doing it in previous years, all of this data is collected at the site level. So when you're entering the number of kindergarten students, that means at your site. The only exception to that is once you get down here to the funding part. When you're talking about the funding that was spent and the amounts of that is district level. So if you have 3 elementary schools in your district, this top section is going to look different for each elementary school, but this bottom section will be identical for all of them, because this is talking about district strong readers funds. So once we get to the 27-28 school year, we will start talking about adding these questions in about retention, number of students retained, promoted by alternative assessment, promoted by good cause exemption. And then the school year beyond that, there'll be some questions about the performance of those 4th graders that were promoted on good cause exemptions. But once again, that won't be in effect for till the 27-28 and 28-29 school year. So moving on to funding, and this was a place that we saw big changes this year. So the first big change is in the amount of funding. So you see green at the top. Really, this whole slide is new information. For the past 2 school years, we had been getting $17.5 million for strong readers funds, and this 100% of our strong readers funds is allocated out to districts. We do not spend a penny of the strong readers funding at the state level. All of it is sent out to districts to be used to help readers in their school. So that being said, we had been getting 17.5 million for the last 2 school years. This year, for the 26-27 school years, we are getting $43.7 million allocated for strong readers funds. So once again, $43.7 million will be divided up and sent out in allocations to districts. So that is very exciting in itself, that we have, more than doubled our strong readers funds and the funds that will be going out to districts to make a difference for our young readers. With that, they also gave us in statute a new allocation formula. Previously, the money was divided up and you received money only for your students who were performing below that 40th percentile level. We took the amount of students below that percentile rank and got our overall amount of students that were below level across the state, and we divided our funding, which was 17.5 million last year, divided by that number and got a per pupil allocation. And then you got that multiplied by how many students were below level at your district. That is no longer how it's going to be done. So now we have a three-tiered system of allocating our funds. So the first tier is going to be the base allocation, and it will be 40% of the budget, which this year is 43.7 million. So we will have 40% of 43.7 million will be divided just based on overall K through third grade student enrollment across the state. With that, we'll get a per pupil allotment, and then you will get that times how many students you have enrolled in K through third grade. So looking at last year's numbers, our enrollment's going to be different year to year. So I can't give you an exact amount that you're going to get per student yet. But based on last year's numbers, when I ran this, it was 90 something dollars a year. So I would predict that that would be a good estimate, is that it could be 90 something dollars per student that you would receive in this based allocation. But once again, that could vary based on what our enrollment is. And you will get that, for every student you have K through third grade. I'm really excited about this change because, first of all, now you are getting money for every student, which means that that gives you some money instead of just focusing on our tiered instruction and those targeted and supplemental instruction. You're getting money for every student, which means you're getting some money to spend on tier one instruction. We all know how important that is. If you don't have a strong base in your tier one program, then you're going to have too many students end up in the interventions, and then overwhelms your interventions, and you can't serve that many students properly. So this gives you some money that you can really invest in shoring up your tier one, that core instruction. I think that is so important. So I'm really excited about you getting money for every student in K through third grade to spend on some reading materials. The next part of our allocations is going to be the supplemental weighted funding. So 30% of the 43.7 million will be allocated through this calculation, this supplemental weighted funding. This will be done very similar to how it was before. We're going to get your numbers, but instead of it being anyone below the 40th, you'll notice that it now specifically says tier 2 and tier 3, which is why we have to now get exact numbers from you on how many students are in each tier. So once we get the numbers of tier 2 and tier students receiving those tier 2 and tier 3 intervention services, we will take that number and divide 30% of 43 million by that number of students receiving tier 2 and tier 3 interventions to get a per pupil allocation for students receiving tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. And you will get that multiplied by how many students you have receiving those tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. And that will be your weighted funding. The last category is incentive funding, and its statute states that up to 30% of our allocations will go to districts that showed improvement. So we're currently working on the rules for this, of how we're going to be giving out the incentive funding. It may be if you have an overall decrease of students receiving slips from year to year, or decreasing from beginning year to end of year, students moving tiers. We're still investigating and playing with ideas on that, of how exactly this last 30% is going to be allocated. Also, one thing we're looking at is, since this is the first year for this, we don't have really the baseline for that yet. So it's possible we haven't received approval on this yet, but possible that this incentive funding for this first year may be reallocated to the other allocations, and we would be looking at the incentive funding starting the next school year. So this is how it's going to look, and that's how you're going to be receiving your funding. Very exciting changes. I'm super excited about all the changes with our funding this year. It was put into statute this year too, that if a school district does not report their screening data to the State Department of Education, you will not be receiving fundings. You have to give us your numbers. We have to know how many students you have in order to get these fundings. Really, this is how it always functioned. We had to know how many students you had in order to give funding, but now it is expressly written into statute that you have to have your numbers submitted to receive funding. They put into statute, they listed a few things that you could spend your strong readers funds on, and this is a list of these. Essentially, this really isn't anything new. We were already allowing this. The only thing that I noticed that was notable is that they mentioned instructional coaches, where we had kind of had some questions around using strong readers funds for instructional coaches before. Now it does say in statute that you can use your strong readers funds to pay for a literacy instructional coach at your site and district level. So that is the only thing really on this that is kind of new. And then I mentioned also that the summer school would have to include 70 hours, which will, take effect next year. There's the funding checklist, and you can find that on our web page that will give you a little bit more details as to far as things that you could spend your strong readers funds on, as well as it includes the OCAS codes that you would need to code these expenses. This is a new thing. Really, it's really not a new thing added, it's something taken away. So previously we had a 10% spending requirement for districts that received $2,500 were required to spend 10% of their strong readers funds on literacy professional development from one of our approved vendors. And this was taken out of statute. So districts are no longer required to meet this spending requirement. We are going to keep our list of professional development, but it will move from an approved list, which it was previously, to now it will just be guidance only. So if you're just looking for some good literacy professional development, you still might want to check this list. We're still adding to it currently. We are in the process right now of finishing up a review and hoping to add those in the next month. Hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll have some of those added on there. So if you are looking for some good literacy professional development, you can look at these and know that it is something that we reviewed and it met our minimum qualifications to make this list. But once again, it is now just a guidance for professional development, not a requirement. We have a few additional changes that won't take place for another school year out. So that is our retention. Once again, retention is not going into effect for the school year that is about to start. 26-27 will not have any of these retention components. Starting in the 27-28 school year, we will be tying retention to and third grade promotion retention decisions to the state reading test. So for in school year 27-28, our third graders will take that state reading test, and if they don't pass it, then they would be retained for the upcoming school year, which would really be the 28-29 school year that they would be retained for if they don't qualify for a good cause exemption or pass the state reading test. One thing that's different about this as compared to when we used to have retention under RSA is that it includes some talk of retention for first and second graders. I will say that it's what it says now for first and second grade is that if those first and second grade students aren't reaching the 40th percentile rank if they're not meeting the grade level target, that you would have conversations about retention with their parents. So in first and second grade, it would be optional retention. The parents could ultimately opt out of retention in that first and second grade. You'll notice it does not have kindergarten on there. So we're only talking first and second grade. You would have to have a talk of retention, but parents could opt out. Once they get to third grade, they would no longer have that parent opt out decision on third grade. Another thing that is new is that in statute, it refers to transitional grades. It does not say you have to offer transitional grades, but it does say that a student in those first and second grades could be retained, or you could place them in a transitional grade. And so we just wanted to put some guidelines in place for those transitional grades as far as strong readers go. So if your school offers a transitional grade, these are the things that we want to see as under the Strong Readers Act, is that you would screen them as the previous grade. So for example, if you're having T1 between kindergarten and first grade, for those students who are finishing kindergarten, but they're not quite ready to go to first grade, and you're offering a T1 in there, we want you to screen them as the previous grade. So you would, so for T1 between K and 1, you would screen those students as kindergartners. What that means a lot of times is when you screen them at the beginning of the year as kindergartners, they're going to be above the 40th percentile rank. But we want them, if they're in a transitional grade, we want you to put them on a slip and leave them on the slip the entire year long, regardless of their screener score. Because there's a reason you put them in that transitional grade, and it's because they needed some extra help. So we want to document that extra help that you're giving them for that entire school year. The other thing is we want that to count as a year of retention. So later on, when we start talking about retention, once they get to third grade, there are criteria about if they've been previously retained. And so if they are doing a transitional grade, that would count as a year of retention for them. Another change due to statute is that our Heroes Literacy team is no longer a pilot. It was set to sunset this summer. And with the new bill, they made this a permanent program. So we get to keep our heroes around permanently now. And it also expanded our program. We've hired additional heroes and our team is larger now. And also it said that we would be giving priority to the lowest performing districts. And another thing it says that is if your district is identified as a low performing district and they assign a hero to you and you decline to work with that hero and have them present in your buildings, then you would also be declining your strong readers funding. So if you are, once again, if you are assigned a hero, your cooperation with them is directly tied to your strong readers funding. You may have heard about our literacy micro-credential academies. These were ran through the cooperation of OEQA with some of our universities in the state of Oklahoma. And they are still currently doing some of them. Some of them wrapped up last week. Some of them are still currently going on. But this is meant to help districts that do not have a reading specialist or an interventionist, someone trained. And so they're sending a certified, does have to be a certified staff member that they were sending to these academies. And funding is available to pay for the registration, pay the universities for these trainings, as well as a stipend for the teachers completing the training. This is not something just a teacher can sign up for. This is something that was sent only to superintendents who sent them to their principals, and they were allowed to only send one per school site to this. We do plan on having this offered again next school year. So if you are someone who didn't get to go this year and you're interested in going next year, let your building principal know that. And we anticipate being able to offer this again next year. If you'd like to stay up on Strong Readers, I will be offering my Strong Readers monthly Zoom calls again this school year. We will start those in August and they run through May. So once again, I don't do them throughout the summer. I only do them during the school year, August to May. And they're on the second Tuesday of each month at 1 p.m. I offered at the end of the school year a survey, and 1 p.m. overwhelmingly won the vote again. So we will be doing it at 1 p.m. again. Another thing that came out of that survey that I thought was a great idea, I opened up and said any suggestions, and we had some people suggest that they would like to be able to submit their questions ahead of time before the meeting. And so I think that's a great idea. So I am going to post once we get our Zoom links posted. We always have the same Zoom link that goes throughout the school year, and very soon we will get that Zoom link posted as well as the dates for our new meetings. And we will have right there by that posted a form that you can click into to submit your questions to me early. And if you put a question in there, I will check those out ahead of time the meeting and always already have those in the agenda and ready to answer for everyone's benefit. I feel like if it's a question that's getting asked a lot, it's better for me to just address it, and everyone else is probably having the same question as well. So I thought that was a great suggestion from one of our schools. So I am going to open it up now let me go to Tyler. Tyler, can you tell me if there were any questions coming up in chat that I need to address now?
A question that multiple people have had, do you have any guidance or sample policy to assist with updating district policy for this year?
So we are not allowed to publish a sample school board policy. I am going to make these slides that I posted today available so that you can look through, as well as we have upcoming Hopefully I can get this posted in the next week. We have a one pager that's going to highlight just the changes that were in effect for this coming year, as well as the changes that will be upcoming for the next year. So once we have that posted, maybe that could give some guidance as to those changes so you can get those updated in your school board policy. Um, this recording, I see one about the recording. We didn't post I'd hoped to put the recording from last week, but we had some technical issues where I kept cutting out and we were having internet connectivity issues. And so I didn't want to post that recording, but I will be posting this recording very soon. We have a literacy YouTube channel. And if you follow our YouTube channel, it hopefully will be on there tonight. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer than that to get on our website because I don't have direct access to do that. I have to submit it and it takes a few days for that to get uploaded onto the website. But we will post it on our Strong Readers website, but that might take a few more days. So if you're looking for it sooner, you can probably find it on our YouTube channel.
And then someone asked, students who were previously retained may be retained again in school year 27-28.
Yes. So the way it reads in statute currently, now remember we still have one legislative session before this goes into effect. So we could see changes in this next legislative session. But the way it is written right now says that students can be retained up to twice. So if a student was previously retained in K1 or 2 and they don't pass that third grade test, they can be retained in third grade. Yes. The exception to that is if the student's on an IEP and they've previously been retained once, then they would not be retained again. But for a student who is not on an IEP, they can be retained twice. It does say you can't retain them twice in third grade. So if the student has not been retained and you retain them in third grade and then they don't pass the test that year, you would go ahead and send them on. They can only be retained once in third grade. But if they've been retained previously, they still could be retained in third grade as well.
And then another question, is there an advisory committee from school districts to help with the ideas about how to identify areas to be awarded?
We haven't got there yet, but yes, we will. We are working on, we're going to have several things that we're going to have some committees where, and we're going to have some people from different districts, and we're looking at adding, some rural districts representation as well as some of our metro school representation. So a few different areas that we're going to be having people serve on. One is going to be for our approval of the state screener. So OEQA, like I said, is running the first thing to narrow it down to 3. But once we get their 3 and we're looking at narrowing it to 1, we are going to have an advisory committee with some district representation of narrowing that from 3 to 1. Yes, as well as we will be developing some advisory team at looking at the improvement incentive as well. Yes.
And then will you tell everyone what the name of the YouTube channel was again?
Ooh. Let me double check. It is, I want to say it is, let me just look real fast to make sure that I can drop it in the chat. I want to say it is literacy or literacy. Let me double check. It is SDE literacy. SDE literacy. Let me see if I can just share it here. Oops. A minute. It's taking me a second. While I'm trying to get that copied over, Tyler, is there anything else?
Someone said there was something said about second grade assessments exempting from third year retention on a flyer posted about changes. Is this referring to this year's second graders and their universal screening score? That's the whole question.
Okay, I don't know what flyer we're referring to. We haven't put anything out about that yet. Can you read that to me one more time so I make sure that I am, okay, hold on just a second. I have just posted our YouTube channel in the chat. Make sure everybody sees that. There's our YouTube channel, so you can subscribe to that. And I should have this posted later tonight there. Okay, let me see this again. About, I don't see that question. Tyler, can you read it again? Oh, wait.
There was something
There it is.
said about second grade assessments exempting from third grade retention on a flyer posted about changes. Is this referring to this year's second graders and their universal screening score?
Okay, so I'm still for sure not sure what flower we're talking about, but I can answer this question. It is not talking about the screener score. So what is in statute currently, which would not go into effect once again, it would not be this upcoming year's second graders. It would be 27, 28 school years second graders. What is in statute is that schools will be required to offer the third grade reading test to their second graders. It does give the option of parents to opt their student out, but it does not give an option of schools to opt out of offering it. So once again, unless something changes this next legislative session, in the 27-28 school year, schools will have to give the third grade reading test to their second graders. If a student passes that test in second grade, they would not be held to retention in third grade, but they would still have to take the reading test in third grade, but they wouldn't be held to retention. So that is what is currently in statute, unless something changes in the next school year.
Okay, so they want clarity. It doesn't start until spring 2028.
It would be, yes, it would be the test that would be taken in spring of 2028. That's when all of the testing for the second grades or third grades would not be, those would not be tied to retention until spring of 28. So your kids coming into third grade right now, this doesn't apply to them. It would be the kids that would be going into third grade the next year, or those second graders for next year that would be doing that. Is there anything else?
Can you clarify what passing is?
I cannot yet because that is to be determined. I do know that it doesn't specify. Before it was certain criteria on the state test, like only certain standards, and it doesn't say that right now. So that will all be determined by the state assessment and OEQA. So we have a little while to get that figured out. So I do not know what exactly passing is going to look like. So this year, no, I see another question about spring. It will, your current second graders that are about to start school next month, they will not be taking a test in second grade for this. I see some questions about what might flag a school to have a hero assigned to them. I am not on the team that's working on that, but I do know what they have told me is that it's not a single criteria. So it's not just state test. It's not just school report card. It's not just the screener scores, but it's kind of looking at all of that. They're going to be looking at multiple measures, which could include your screening data, your school report card, your state test, all of those things together. What support services are you already receiving? If you're already receiving help from SPDIG or any of those things. So it's going to be a combination of measures that would they'd be looking at to determine who would be assigned a hero.
We have a question that just came in. If they complete the letters to your training cohort, are they considered micro-credentialed?
Yes. Yes. If you have completed letters training, Ames pathway, Lit Cop, that would be considered micro-credentialed. We would also consider if you're like a CALT or a COP, we would consider that they would be qualified to complete that line on the slip as well.
That was the last question.
Okay. All right. So we will get this posted and then we will The next time I will be meeting live with you all will be for our August meeting. So the second Tuesday in August at 1 o'clock, we will be meeting again. And I just want to say, as always, thank you all. I know most of you are not back in school yet. And if you're watching this right now live, you're using some of your own time to watch that. And that's just something that we know all educators do. We use our own time to go above and beyond for our students because it's important for them. It's important for us. So thank you for all that you do every day for the young readers across our state. Have a good day. Bye.